Yeah.
Sandy, you can do it?
So should we just wait a little bit before it happens?
Yeah, we can do it later.
Yeah, so like, Mother's Day, oh, I think we had talked about maybe the 12th for breakfast.
I think you did.
I think we did.
Hmm.
And, so for lunch, the 11th is off, the 25th is Memorial Day weekend, is that, I don't know if that's gonna be out to anybody, it wouldn't matter to
We'll
us.
be away, Sunday to Monday.
Yeah, so kind of the 18th, if that's available to anybody.
Okay.
Also, for the ladies thing, it doesn't have to be a Monday, I don't think.
Well, it had to be for a while. I mean,
Because
I don't
of
think
Sandy.
change.
Sandy, yeah, but we've had it once on a Wednesday, and I think we have it once on a Thursday now.
Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday as well.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Fairly flexible.
yeah, we can see if it's a Monday, I'm fine for the 12th.
Actually, the 12th, I do have breakfast.
Okay, well, we could do any other,
Yeah.
a Wednesday morning might even work.
Is-
Morning.
Are you solo today?
No, Sandy's here.
She's coming?
Yeah, she works with kids today.
Oh, okay.
So, we're talking about the date for the ladies' breakfast, Monday, I'm not really sure.
Can I ask that we do it after class? Because we're kind of we've been online for a while now.
Oh, have you? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Just get up straight, wave your hands.
Okay. That's okay. When I download this video and edit it to put it up on YouTube or Rumble, I'm going to have a lot to cut out there at the beginning, so it's fine. But it will be in its unedited glory on Facebook till they delete it. All right, cool. We are live. Let me open up in prayer. Lord, thank you for your people. Thank you for your word. And just pray that you would be with us this morning. Speak to us through this passage. In Jesus' name, amen. We are continuing in Ecclesiastes. We are in chapters 5 and 6. And there's two main topics, kind of back to back in these chapters. It's worship is the first part of chapter 5. And then the second part of chapter 5 into chapter 6 is about money. And so if you have opinions or attitudes or issues with either of those things, get ready. You'll probably, if you read through the whole book, you'll probably notice this kind of feels like a parenthetical section. It doesn't really flow from what's before it to what's after it. But I think it's probably this book was not written as a book. It was just a collection of things that they kind of edited together. So, but that's not unusual. Okay, so chapter 5, he says, "Guard your steps as you go to the house of God, and draw near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know they are doing evil. Do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God, for God is in heaven and you are on the earth. Therefore let your words be few. For the dream comes through much effort, and the voice of a fool through many words." Okay, so this kind of sounds like Proverbs-ish if you are familiar with that book. But Solomon says in verse 1 to guard your steps as you go into the house of God and draw near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. I know that Hebrews tells us when we come into God's presence that we can come boldly, right? That's kind of the thing. That's a New Testament thing. Remember, the veil was torn and now we have access to the presence of God. But don't take that to mean that we can come presumptuously. And that's still true, even in the age of grace, if you will. Quite frankly, the fact that we can come into his presence at all is the miracle, right? And so we shouldn't take his presence lightly. And especially for us, because, it took too much and the cost was too high for us to have that privilege, for us to treat it lightly. And so when he says we need to guard our steps when we come to worship, yeah, and when I come to church, I wear a shirt with a collar and buttons. I'm just saying. You should see me during the week. But, I mean, that's not a huge thing for me. I'm not legalistic about that. But I do wonder if we consider often enough what was secured for us on the cross and what a privilege it is to actually live, not just come into his presence, but to live in his presence now, since the veil was torn. And he says, verse 1, draw near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. Humility, come in an attitude of learning, listening, and receiving, right? Again, not presumptuously, because he says, otherwise that's the sacrifice of fools. And then he says, for they do not know they're doing evil. Coming in and with your head not in the right place, basically, is what he's saying. He calls evil. They're doing evil by coming presumptuously into God's presence. And then he comes to the words we speak, and this is not just done in worship, but he's making a connection because in those days vows were made usually at the temple. You remember the story of Hannah, right? She's praying at the temple for a son, and she makes a vow to dedicate him to the Lord if God will give her this. And the temple is where those kinds of vows were usually made. So he says in verse 2, do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought to bring up a matter in the presence of the Lord. I think, sometimes we forget who we are and we forget who God is, and I saw this in the Army. If you work one-on-one with somebody else of a vastly different rank, whether a couple levels up or a couple levels down or whatever, officer, enlisted, something like that, and you work one-on-one, sometimes things can get informal. And sometimes a little too informal. And sometimes you forget the protocols of rank, right? And how often do we do that sort of thing with God? And we forget we're us and he's him. Sometimes you get familiar, but don't get presumptuous, is what I'm saying. Don't ever forget who it is we're dealing with, right? And he says in verse 2, therefore let your words be few. I'm reminded in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6, Jesus was talking, he said, and when you're praying, do not use meaningless repetition as the Gentiles do, for they suppose they will be heard for their many words. Do we think we can convince God to do something because we nag him? And at this point, I know somebody's going to bring up the parable of the widow who came knocking at the judge's door in the middle of the night. Remember that one? Well, that is such a wildly misunderstood and mistaught parable. There are different kinds of parables. There are parables of comparison and there are parables of contrast. The prodigal son is a parable of comparison. God is like the Father, right? That parable of the woman banging on the judge's door in the middle of the night is a parable of contrast. And in fact, if you read it, Jesus calls that judge the evil judge. So it's not God. It's a contrast, not a comparison. And listen to what he says at the end. Do you remember? Well, let me read it for you. For while he was unwilling, but afterward he said to himself, even though I do not fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow bothers me, I will give her legal protection. Otherwise, by continually coming, she will wear me out. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge said. And then he says, now will not God bring about justice for his elect who cry out to him day and night? And will he long delay over them? I tell you that he will bring about justice for them quickly. However, the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? So you see, he's saying you don't need to nag. There's no nagging necessary with God, right? There's no need to try to wear him out. And Solomon says that trying to do that is what fools do. All right, verse 4. When you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it, for he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Do not let your speech cause you to sin, and do not say in the presence of the messenger of God that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry on account of your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For in many dreams and in many words there is emptiness. Rather fear God. So we don't really do vows much these days, do we? But like I mentioned, Hannah, that was a vow, right? Well, most everybody here is married, right? Everybody here is married. We have a portion of the wedding ceremony we call the exchanging of vows, right? And so what does Solomon say about vows? He says, do not be late in paying for it, for he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. Well, what does that mean in the context of marriage? It means for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. Pay what you vow. If you promised it, then live it. Right? That's the point. And he says, verse 5, it is better that you should not vow than you should vow and not pay. And boy, is that ever true in marriage. The only thing worse, somebody once said, than being unmarried and wishing you were married is being married and wishing you were unmarried. Am I right? No, I wouldn't know. But obviously, I'm not speaking from experience. But I know people, right? And what happens when you don't live up to your vows? Well,
Lots of things.
there's the ever-present example of Ananias and Sapphira. Remember them? Acts 5, they promised to sell land, give all the proceeds to the church. They held back some. And, God killed them right in the middle of a worship service. I've never been to a worship service like that, but, maybe you have. But they're having church, and it all got interrupted by Peter to call them on the carpet. And you know what's really interesting is at the end of that, in Acts 5:11, it says, and great fear came over the whole church and over all who heard these things. I bet it did. Yeah.
But you know what, when I do things like this and I'm praying to God, I think to myself, sometimes I would like to commit some leg of my life to permanent change, but when I'm praying to God about things like that, I say, Lord, I will try to do this to the best of my ability, because I can't actually promise to do it, because I know I'm human, and I fail, and I'm flawed, and my brain may not,
Mm-hmm.
and I think to myself, I'm not gonna promise the mighty God to do something that makes some kind of permanent change if I don't think I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I really want to, I can promise to try, but he fortunately, I think he knows our, I know he knows our hearts, but I think about this a lot.
Well, he resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. So there you go. But what he says there in verse 7, rather fear God. So we come into his presence boldly, yes, but not carelessly, like I said, not presumptuously or flippantly. And by the way, to remind you, Ananias and Sapphira were given as an example for the church. This is not Israel, this is not Old Testament. This is New Testament, and this is even after the day of Pentecost. So, right, it's a church story, it's not an Israel story. And so, if you vow to God, God will hold you accountable one way or another. Verse 8, if you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight, for one official watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. After all, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage to the land. So, don't misunderstand what Solomon's saying here. He's not condoning corruption. He says a king is almost a necessary evil. He says, verse 9, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage in the land. So it's good to have a king that's, doing well and prospering. But if you look at political corruption and you say, well, just throw all the bums out. I'm from the throw all the bums out party. I approve this message. Be careful, because anarchy is not a biblical solution. It's not an option. Romans 13 explains that all government is ordained by God, and is a servant of God, and it is there for his purposes, right? Now, if you're ready to say, well, what about a corrupt government? Well, I will read again to you the epistle to the saints in Rome that Paul wrote in Rome while he was in prison in Rome. Okay, what about a corrupt government? What about it? I go back again to my Army experience. That gave me more material for teaching illustrations than anything I have ever done in my life. Obedience is drilled into you. Obedience to authority is drilled into you from the very first day of being in the military. And, what if you don't like the person who's over you? Well, that's why they start you off on day one with a drill sergeant. It don't matter if you like him, right? Who's going to be yelling at you for all of the reasons and for no reasons in particular. And so God says all authority is ordained by God. And I think I bring that up because I think veterans get this a little better than most. You honor the rank, not the person. That was actually quoted, that's a saying, but that was quoted in Band of Brothers, I think. And there was one scene where that happened. Job learned that. You respect God for who he is and not just whether you think he's doing a good job. Whether you understand what he's doing or not, good or bad, right? And that's kind of the point. All right. Verse 10. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. When good things increase, those who consume them increase. But so, what is the advantage of their owners except to look on? The sleep of the working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich man does not allow him to sleep. So we're shifting obviously into the next section of the topics here. We've moved on to now money. And he starts off with that very thing. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money. His opening point is loving money or he who loves abundance, right? And the point is this: you're not going to be satisfied. You don't find satisfaction in those things. And what Solomon is saying is that when it comes to money and possessions or abundance, it's stupid to love those things because they won't love you back. And they can't love you back. You'll end up disappointed at best and shipwrecked at worst. It's vanity or, striving after wind. It's futile. It's whatever happens. So if you've ever experienced a large increase in income in your life, what happens when you get more stuff? You don't notice it if you go up gradually as much. I mean, you may, but if you have a large increase in income, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your expenses go up with it. You've probably all experienced that. And he says that in verse 11, when good things increase, those who consume them increase. We had, our last house was much bigger than our current house. Much bigger. And we've replaced water heaters in both houses. Except then in the last house, in the bigger house, there were 2 water heaters. Okay, so just saying, that's what he's saying here. When good things increase, those who consume them increase. Your expenses go up when you have more.
Big lines increase still faster than
Yeah,
these.
yeah. It takes money to make money. Well, it also takes money to maintain money. Bigger house has bigger mortgage, higher taxes, more rooms to fill with furniture, more walls to paint, more floors to cover, more crap to clean. Oops, I said crap. Sorry, don't say crap. It also needs more maintenance, right? And so what's the result? Well, he says this one thing for sure: the rich man won't be getting very good sleep at night with all the stuff to worry about. He says in verse 12, the sleep of the working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich man does not allow him to sleep. If you own too much stuff, I didn't say it, then you have to worry, you own too much, then you have to worry about all that stuff. You remember there was an episode in Seinfeld where they were all taking a trip somewhere and somebody was going to get bumped up to first class because they were out of seats. And the argument went, well, I think it was Elaine was like, I got to go to first class because my back hurts or whatever she was saying. And Jerry said, no, you've never been to first class. You don't know what it's like. It won't mean anything to you. I've been up there. I know what it's like. I'm not going back to that. So that's kind of the point. That's what being wealthy is like, right? You become accustomed to it and it hurts when you don't get it.
Your things you own can own you.
Yes, exactly. All right. Speaking of which, verse 13. There is a grievous evil which I have seen under the sun, riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. Whether those riches were lost through a bad investment and he had fathered a son, then there was nothing to support him. As he had come naked from his mother's womb, so he will return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Exactly as a man is born, thus will he die. So what is the advantage to him who toils for the wind? Throughout his life, he also eats in darkness and creates with great vexation, sickness, and anger. So pay attention to this because Solomon blew right past not being able to be satisfied. If you're a lover of money and a lover of things, then you're the loser, right? If you're gluttonous for stuff that you can hoard and what you have and covet what you don't have, he said, verse 13, it's a grievous evil. And by the way, he says it's also to his hurt. Here's how we describe it, right? You get all you can all you get, you sit on the can, right? You've heard that saying. But he's, no, haven't heard that? Mark's used that in sermons, yeah, several times. Yeah, gets who gets gold stars. We listen to our pastor.
I mean, memorize it.
Yeah, maybe I just didn't like that one.
Maybe. Yeah, okay. It's like that, is it? Yeah. But he calls it evil. There's one thing to place all your trust for happiness into the basket of money and stuff, because you'll just come out with hurt feelings. But if you hoard and put everything of your soul into that, then when you lose it, you've lost everything, right? And so, as Corey Ten Boom said, we hold these things loosely so that it doesn't hurt when God takes them out of our hand.
Yes.
You can lose it in this world with just a bad investment or just an unfortunate election outcome, right? Or you can keep it until the day you die, but even then you lose it. That's why he says in verse 15, he will take nothing of the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hands. Speaking of the life to come. We always say that, you can't take it with you.
There's no U-Haul on the back of the hearse.
Right.
I've heard that one.
That's a
He-
marketing
See,
He-
I did
he-
this. I like that one.
But he goes on to say one more time that this is all just a waste of time and life has to be more than that. Now, the next section seems like a conclusion, but it's not.
Because it says on the top of the heading, conclusion.
But it's not. Verse 18, here is what I have seen to be good and fitting, to eat, to drink, and enjoy oneself in all one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him, for this is his reward. Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he will not often consider the years of his life, because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. Don't misunderstand what's being said here. This is not being recommended to us. He says there are temporal rewards and there are eternal rewards. Solomon's not talking about eternal rewards here. He's strictly limiting himself to temporal ones. And as far as temporal ones goes, he says, and I said this last week, I'll reiterate it again, enjoy what God has blessed you with. But it's legitimate to enjoy that in life. It's not wrong to enjoy the blessings of your labor, but get this poor, we get this, woe is me attitude sometimes in the church where we don't, if we don't need it then to live, then we should give it away to somebody else. And I don't know if anybody here does that, but I have seen people that live like that. Whatever you do, don't enjoy it, right? Give it.
It would be almost evil to
Right.
enjoy
Yeah.
it.
No, it's not evil to enjoy it. He says here in verse 18 that it's good and fitting. And he says to eat, to drink, to enjoy one's labor in all which he toils under the sun. This is good. God's given him for a reward. But remember the phrase under the sun? He uses that here in verse 18. In the context, while it's okay to enjoy what you've earned, if you do this without God, then verse 18, this is his reward. In other words, that's your only reward, right? You got your reward in full. The one who dies with the most toys doesn't win. You already got your reward. Now, remember when Jesus was talking about the religious leaders and he was saying to, give where nobody can see what you're giving? And they were doing these long prayers and they were doing all these things to be noticed by men. And he said in conclusion to that, they have received their reward in full. In other words, they did it to be noticed by men. And so God said, fine, I will choose not to notice. You've received your reward. You got noticed by men. And the same thing is true here. If you live your life under the sun without God, it's okay to enjoy what you've earned, but that's your reward. And that's the only reward. Verse 19, furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. That's the gift of God. Again, it's God's gift to us that we should work and enjoy our labor, but remember that God gave Adam a job to do before the fall, so working is not part of the fall. Just saying.
One note, says interesting thing, that if you work and you enjoy it, if you enjoy what you do, that's a gift from God.
It is.
Some people work and are never happy.
That's true. And honestly, one of the most liberating sermons I ever heard was R.C. Sproul talking about the blessings of work. And it was very liberating because up until that point, almost for my entire life, all the sermons on money I'd ever heard included, men, don't worship your work, and be present in your family, and don't all that. And he took kind of the compliment, it's okay to enjoy what you do, and because at that point I was starting to enjoy what I did.
They may have been addressing, workaholism,
Yeah.
working cost.
Yes.
So there's a balance.
But you hardly ever hear the other side of that in church, that it is a blessing to work.
As an occupational therapist, occupation is purposeful activity.
Yes.
And so, it's important for everybody to have a reason to get up in the morning and have a purpose and something that's meaningful to them,
Yeah.
a way they're being productive and contributing. And
Yep.
so,
Again,
I endorse that.
keep
Outside
this
of self, yeah.
keep this passage, this section in mind and what he's saying. It's not the conclusion that you think it is. But which days of work fly by? The ones where you're working hard, your head's down, no time to breathe, and you're getting the most done. And you look up and it's time to go home. Well, for me, I'm already home, but you know what I'm saying.
Time to let the dogs out.
Right. A few days like that, and before you know it, it's the weekend. And, at the end, your life can be satisfied, right? Because you've accomplished a lot. But he says in verse 20, he will not often consider the years of his life because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. Time flies when you're having fun, and when you're having fun at work, that's great. It's a gift from God. But to wrap it up, be someone who loves God and uses money, and not someone who loves money and uses God. Because where your treasure is, there will your heart be also, right? And that leads us to an examination here in chapter 6, possibly a reevaluation of what true wealth is. How are we doing on time? Okay. Got to read fast. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and which is prevalent among men, a man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them. This is vanity and a severe affliction. Not being able, or not making yourself able to enjoy what you have, he says in verse 1, is evil. So Solomon says not only is it evil, but he says it's prevalent among men, which is interesting. Look, the three things he's talking about, riches, wealth, and honor, you may say, well, what's the difference between riches and wealth? One is the stuff, and the other is what you do with the stuff. So it's really, if you look at it, it's the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life is really what those three things are. And so just because God allows you to have those things doesn't mean that God will allow you to enjoy those things, especially if you've acquired them, verse 1, under the sun without God. He says not only is it vanity and futile, but he says it's a severe affliction. And we were talking about workaholics. It's common for people who are workaholics and very successful to never take the time off to enjoy what they have. You ever know somebody, and my brother's like this, who is very successful at what they do. They've made their nut, and they don't know if they want to retire. He doesn't know if he wants to retire. I'm dying for the day when I can retire. I don't understand that, but people like that, the world needs those alpha types who will make us all get stuff done, I guess.
If you like what you do, why would you want to stop?
Oh, because I can't wait to stop. I don't love it that much.
But what are you gonna fill your time with?
With what I fill my time with now, reading and learning stuff. It's,
Okay.
if I could spend the whole day on the patio reading, I would be happy. But, and traveling and seeing the things and doing the things and seeing the places and taking the pictures and buying the t-shirts. That's what I would do.
And honeydew.
And going to places and seeing things. Anyway. Remember what I've been saying all along, is that, and Solomon's been saying all along, I should say, is God is the one who infuses all those things with meaning, right? It's okay to have the things, it's okay to enjoy the things, but not for those things for their own sake. We enjoy them because they're a blessing from God, right? He provides satisfaction. If you accomplish all these things under the sun without him, then he's not going to allow you to derive pleasure from them and satisfaction and meaning. And I'm not saying, this is more of a passive thing. I'm not saying he's going to come in and steal your joy. I'm saying he hasn't designed you to get joy from them without him. And so, there you go. Verse 3. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, however many they may be, but his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he does not even have a proper burial, better the miscarriage than he, for it comes in futility, and it goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. It never sees the sun, and it never knows anything. It is better off than he. Even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy good things, do not all go to one place. 100 children, that's a very tired wife. But of course, that's hyperbole. The ultimate sign of great...
Also might have had more than one.
That's true too. A sign of great wealth in those days was having a lot of children, free laborers. And lives many years, that was a sign of divine blessing in that culture, that if you grow old, that you're blessed. So if he has many children, lives a long life, it says, but verse 3, his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he does not even have a proper burial. If you do all these kinds of things, kinds of blessings, and pursue more blessings, and they never come to satisfaction, then he's describing it as a waste of time and energy of all that would be. And he uses the crude example of better the miscarriage than he. Why? He says, verse 4, it comes in futility and it goes into obscurity. It never sees the sun, never knows anything. And why is that better? Because this man had everything and enjoyed nothing. He did all the labor and didn't get to enjoy any of the outcome of it. And in verse 6, even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy good things, do not all go to one place. Remember, he's talking about under the sun, right? Without God. There's no point for it. Verse 7, all a man's labor is for his mouth, and yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage does a wise man have over the fool? What advantage does a poor man have, knowing how to walk before the living? What the eye sees is better than what the soul desires. This too is futility and striving after wind. There's a thing called referred pain. I'm sure the occupational therapist would probably, know this. Referred pain is when your body feels pain in one location, but that's not the actual source of the pain, right? It's kind of weird. It's like our bodies are all interconnected or something. It's like, you got a nervous system or something. But this is describing the spiritual version of that. He says, verse 7, all man's labors is for his mouth, and yet his appetite is not satisfied. He keeps shoving food in his pie hole, but it never makes a dent in his appetite. He's feeding the wrong appetite, right? What appetite? It's a good question. The key to this is understanding the fallen human heart and misdiagnosing our true appetites. Like I said before, we have temporal appetites, which can be temporarily filled, but we also have eternal appetites. And I love the quote from C.S. Lewis when he was talking about looking for fulfillment in temporal things when the appetite is an eternal one. He said, for they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. There's an appetite that's not temporal, right? And it's really good. That's from the Weight of Glory. It's a very short read and worth it. But if that's true, then maybe all of man's labor for his mouth was unnecessary, right? And he says in verse 8, for what advantage does the wise man have over the fool? What advantage does the poor man have, knowing how to walk before the living? If you're hungry and you're rich, you can eat whatever you want, whenever you want. If you're poor, you can't. But if hunger is not your real problem, then it doesn't matter if you're rich. That's his point. What advantage does the rich man have? Right? Verse 9, what the eye sees is better than what the soul desires. Your mind thinks that these things can fulfill that desire of your soul, but the desire of your soul is an eternal appetite, not a temporal one. And there's nothing in this world that can fill it. Money can't love you back. The appetite can't be satisfied by these things. But Paul said, 1 Timothy 6:6, but godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. Right? Verse 10, whatever exists has already been named, and it is known what man is, for he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he. For there are many words which increase futility. What then is the advantage to a man? For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during these few years of his futile life? He will spend them like a shadow, for who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? So baseball. Baseball is a really different sport from other sports, football, hockey. Mostly because, partly because nobody gets jacked up in baseball unless you're sliding into home or something. At least if you're doing it right. Somebody always gets jacked up in football or hockey, which are my favorite sports. I love those. But there's one way that baseball is really different and a little odd. The umpire is the lord of his domain in baseball. And it all comes down to the strike zone, right? And it's an imaginary box in the air. And you can define it any way you want, and you can try to tell the umpire that he's wrong, but it's still, he's the lord of his domain, and it's an imaginary box in the air, right? And so there was an umpire that was interviewed one time, and he was asked how he feels when he gets a call wrong. And his answer was, what do you mean? He said, there's no ball or strike until I call it. Nobody's safe or out until I call it. I don't understand the question.
Is it the only sport where there's only one, two? Like football?
No, there's four, yeah.
They're in the playoffs, there's three.
Are they really? Oh, I didn't know that.
In the field?
Yeah, there's one umpire, but there's referees, there's line judges and stuff
Well,
like
even
that.
refs, is one ref.
They're all umpires, there's a cruise ship.
Okay, yeah, it's like football, you have the white hat.
Yeah.
But he's the master of his domain, right? Solomon is saying here that God is the master of his domain. And we come to the question of satisfaction, of meaning in life. God's the one who defines these things. They are what he calls them, right? If you live your life trying to fill eternal appetites with temporal things, you're trying to call a chicken a horse. And you may convince yourself that a chicken is a horse. You may even convince all your friends and family that a chicken is a horse, but you can't put a saddle on a chicken and ride it. That's kind of the point there. Be a big chicken, I guess. All right, let's close in prayer. Lord, thank you for this reminder about what's truly important in life, that we can be successful, unsuccessful, we can be material or materialistic or not. But what we need to be is concerned about finding our satisfaction, our fulfillment in you first, and that all these things will be added to us, because you know we need all these things. And in that way, let us derive our pleasure and our contentment from these things, while looking not at them, but through them to the giver of all good things. And we thank you for that reminder. And be with us now as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.